My fiancé said, "Trust me, it's just one last night with the guys." I did. 3 days later, his father exposed what really happened, and there was no wedding to attend. My name is Emily Carter, and I'm 29 years old. People like to say you can tell when you're about to make the biggest mistake of your life. I used to think that was comforting nonsense. If people really saw disaster coming, nobody would walk willingly into it. I certainly didn't. I spent 10 months planning a wedding to a man who had already started building another life behind my back. Looking back now, the warning signs weren't dramatic. They were small enough for love to explain away, and that's exactly what I did. Nathan Brooks and I had been together for 4 years. We met during a charity fundraiser where we both volunteered because neither of us actually wanted to spend another Saturday at work, networking with strangers. He accidentally spilled iced coffee on my white blouse. I accidentally laughed instead of getting angry. By the end of the afternoon, he'd convinced me to have dinner with him to make up for attempted murder by caffeine. That dinner became dozens more. 4 years later, we were counting down the final 3 weeks before our wedding. Our apartment had turned into organized chaos. Fabric samples covered the dining table, RSVP cards spilled from one basket, and seating charts competed for space with half-finished vendor invoices. Every evening, we ended up sitting on the floor with takeout containers. Looking back, that's probably why I never questioned any of it. Everything felt ordinary, comfortable enough that I stopped looking for cracks. Nathan insisted on handling one responsibility himself. "The guest list on my side," he said, barely looking up from his laptop. "Let me deal with my family and business contacts. You already have enough on your plate." I hesitated for a second before smiling. "If you're sure." "I'm sure." It sounded thoughtful, exactly the kind of small gesture that made trusting him feel easy. So I did. Sometimes love isn't about sharing every responsibility. Sometimes it's about trusting someone enough to carry one. At least that's what I believe then. A week later, our wedding planner called, asking if I could stop by the venue to approve the final room assignments. Nathan couldn't make it because of a client meeting. "I'll handle it," I texted him. He replied almost instantly, "Perfect, love you." There was nothing in that text message that made me stop and look twice. I wish there had been. As I walked across the parking lot toward the venue, someone called my name. "Emily!" I turned to see Daniel from my Saturday hiking group jogging toward me with a takeaway coffee in one hand. "Still disappearing every weekend?" he teased. I laughed. Wedding planning has taken over my life. He shook his head with a grin. "Well, once you're officially married, you'd better come back. The trails aren't the same without you." "I'll hold you to that." We exchanged a quick wave before heading in opposite directions. At the time, I had no idea that brief conversation would matter months later. The venue overlooked a peaceful lake surrounded by tall pine trees. The ballroom was almost finished. White flowers lined the entrance. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. I stood with our wedding planner, Melissa, reviewing every reservation one last time. "Everything looks great," I said. She smiled proudly. "There's just one last VIP suite we added yesterday." I frowned. "We added one?" Melissa glanced down at her tablet. "Yes, your fiancé approved it." She scrolled. "Suite 804. I blinked. "I don't remember discussing another suite." "Oh." She hesitated. "I assumed you knew." A strange feeling settled in my stomach. "Who is it for?" Melissa read the reservation. "Vanessa Reed." The name meant absolutely nothing to me. I don't know anyone named Vanessa. Melissa looked confused. "I thought she was family." "No." She turned the tablet toward herself again. "Maybe she's one of Nathan's corporate guests?" I forced a small smile. "Probably." That's what I told her. That's what I told myself. Before leaving, Melissa laughed softly. "I have to admit." "What?" "She's been very particular." "What do you mean?" "Oh, nothing serious. She called 3 times asking us to change flowers in the suite. Then she requested champagne. Yesterday she even wanted extra candles." I stared at her. "She can do that?" "Well..." Melissa suddenly looked uncomfortable. She said the groom had already approved everything. Melissa hadn't said the hotel approved it. She hadn't said management approved it. She'd said Nathan approved it himself. That single detail stayed with me all the way home. I drove home with the radio turned off. On the drive home, I kept inventing explanations for him. Maybe Melissa had misunderstood. Maybe Vanessa really was a client. Or maybe I was looking for excuses because accepting the alternative felt impossible. Love is incredibly creative when it comes to protecting itself. That evening, Nathan came home smiling. He wrapped his arms around me before I could even say hello. As he stepped back, his eyes drifted toward our engagement photo hanging above the fireplace. He stared at it for a moment. "So much planning," he murmured. "What?" He blinked, almost as if I'd caught him somewhere else. "Nothing." Then he smiled again. "Just thinking how lucky I am. Only 19 days. "I know. You excited?" "I am." It wasn't a lie. I was excited. I was also curious. Casually, I asked, "Who's Vanessa?" His smile didn't disappear completely. It faltered. Barely. The kind of tiny hesitation most people would have missed. I'd spent 4 years studying his face. I didn't. "Vanessa?" "The woman staying in suite 804? Recognition flashed across his face. "Oh, Vanessa?" He frowned for a second, as though he needed to remember who I meant. She's connected to one of our commercial accounts. What does she do? It's kind of complicated. Really? They're sending representatives from out of town. Then why is the reservation under only her name? Nathan shrugged while taking off his jacket. Honestly, I don't know how companies organize travel. He walked into the kitchen. Melissa probably misunderstood. Maybe she had. Except Melissa never misunderstood invoices, or contracts, or reservations. She'd planned luxury weddings for 15 years. Still, I let the conversation end there. Later that night, he fell asleep within minutes. I stayed awake replaying every word we'd exchanged. For the first time in 4 years, I wasn't questioning what he'd said. I was questioning what he'd carefully avoided saying. The following afternoon, while organizing vendor payments, I noticed something that didn't belong. One vendor name appeared on Nathan's reimbursement spreadsheet, but I couldn't remember seeing it on any of our wedding contracts. Property management services. I searched through every invoice we'd collected over the past 10 months. Nothing matched. That was the moment I stopped telling myself I was overthinking everything. Instead of confronting Nathan, I decided I needed someone who knew how to follow money better than I did. The company wasn't listed anywhere. That was when I realized I needed professional help. By Friday, doubt had become something I could no longer ignore. Not because I had proof, because every answer seemed designed to stop more questions. That's when I contacted someone I'd never imagined I'd need. Her name was Rachel Monroe. She wasn't a private investigator in the movie sense. She specialized in financial investigations involving hidden assets, corporate fraud, and complicated background checks. The kind of work that usually began when someone suspected the paperwork was telling a different story than the person sitting across the dinner table. When we met inside a quiet cafe, she listened without interrupting. I hope I'm overreacting, I admitted. I hope you are too, Rachel replied. But hope isn't evidence. She slid a business card across the table. What exactly do you want me to find? I don't know, she nodded. That's usually how these conversations begin. I hesitated before answering. I just need to know whether the man I'm about to marry is hiding something important. Rachel closed her notebook. I'll start with financial records that are legally accessible. If there's nothing there, you'll sleep better. And if there is? She met my eyes. Then you'll be grateful you asked before the wedding instead of after it. Over the next 3 days, Nathan behaved exactly as he always had. Every morning he kissed me goodbye, complained about his tuxedo fitting, asked whether the florist had confirmed the centerpieces, and reached for my hand whenever we watched television. If he was hiding anything, he never let it show. He had become frighteningly good at pretending. Tuesday morning, my phone rang. Rachel, I think we should meet. My heartbeat quickened. You found something? I found enough that I don't think this conversation belongs over the phone. An hour later, I sat across from her again. She placed a slim folder on the table. I traced the property management company. I looked down at the documents but couldn't bring myself to open them. Rachel spoke quietly. It isn't managing commercial property. My throat tightened. It's managing one apartment. I finally looked up. The lease is registered to a woman named... She turned the page toward me. Vanessa Reed. Before I could say a word, Rachel slid one more envelope across the table. It arrived anonymously at my office this morning. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single glossy photograph. Nathan, standing outside an apartment building, his arms wrapped around Vanessa. Not like co-workers. Not like old friends. Like two people who had once belonged to each other, and perhaps never truly stopped. I must have stared at that photograph for a full minute before I remembered how to breathe. Nathan's arm rested comfortably around Vanessa's waist. She wasn't leaning away. She wasn't surprised. They looked familiar. Not like two people who had accidentally bumped into each other after years apart. Like two people who had never truly let go. Rachel didn't rush me. She simply waited while I forced myself to look closer. The timestamp in the corner caught my attention. 9 days earlier. 9. That meant the picture had been taken while Nathan and I were finalizing our wedding invitations. While we were tasting cakes. While he was telling me how lucky he felt to be marrying me. There has to be an explanation, I whispered, though the words sounded weaker than I intended. There might be, Rachel replied calmly. A photograph tells us something happened. It doesn't always tell us why. I appreciated that she didn't push me toward a conclusion. She dealt in facts, not assumptions. I also traced the monthly payments, she continued. They've been going to the same apartment management company for almost 11 months. How much? She slid another page toward me. $2,350 every month. I did the math automatically. Almost $26,000. Money I never knew existed. Money that certainly hadn't been mentioned when Nathan insisted we needed to reduce our honeymoon budget. He told me we needed to cut expenses, I murmured. Rachel folded her hands together. Emily, I can't tell you what their relationship is, but someone has been paying for that apartment. And it wasn't me. Silence settled between us. Finally, Rachel asked the question I had been avoiding. What do you want to do now? Part of me wanted to drive straight to Nathan's office, throw the photograph onto his desk, demand every answer immediately. But another part, the quieter, more rational part, knew something important. If Nathan was lying, he would simply lie again. I need more. Rachel nodded. I thought you might say that. She handed me a second business card. If you decide to continue, call me. That evening, Nathan came home carrying a bouquet of white lilies, my favorite flowers. I passed the florist and thought of you. He smiled as naturally as ever. For a terrifying moment, I wondered if I'd imagined everything. I kept inventing excuses for him because accepting the truth felt far more frightening than believing another lie. He walked over and kissed my forehead. You look tired. Long day. You've been working too hard. He placed the flowers in a vase without asking. Little things like that had always made me love him. He noticed details. He remembered what made me happy. How could someone so thoughtful also be hiding something so enormous? During dinner, he chatted about table arrangements, music, and whether his father would actually dance at the reception. I answered when necessary. Mostly I watched him. I watched everything about him. The way he smiled, the rhythm of his voice, even how confidently his hands moved while serving dinner. Nothing seemed different. That frightened me more than if he'd looked nervous. Because if he could hide one life this well, what else had I never noticed? The next morning, Nathan left early for work. As soon as his car disappeared, I opened the hallway closet. His jackets hung neatly in a row. I wasn't proud of what I was doing. I'd never searched through his belongings before. Not once in 4 years. Trust had always come naturally. Now it felt painfully expensive. Inside the pocket of his navy blazer, I found nothing. The first pocket held nothing but old receipts, a few business cards, and enough loose change to rattle in my palm. The second jacket was the same. Then I reached his brown overcoat. A small silver key slipped into my hand. No keychain. No label. Just a single apartment key. I stared at it. When Nathan and I moved in together, we had switched to electronic locks. Neither of us carried old-fashioned keys anymore. So why did he? I slipped it into my pocket just as my phone buzzed. Rachel. I ran another check. What is it? I found the apartment. You have the address? Yes. She hesitated. But before you go there, promise me something. What? Don't confront anyone alone. That afternoon, I parked half a block away from the address Rachel had sent. The apartment building wasn't luxurious, but it wasn't cheap either. The building was quiet, modern, and carefully maintained. A woman with dark hair stepped outside wearing the same cream-colored sweater I'd already seen in the photograph. Exactly the sort of place a young professional might choose. I sat inside my car for nearly 20 minutes, convincing myself to leave. Instead, I watched. At 4:17 p.m., a woman walked out carrying grocery bags. She laughed at something on her phone. I recognized her immediately. Vanessa. She looked ordinary. She looked completely ordinary, the kind of person I would have walked past 100 times without giving her a second glance. Somehow, that hurt even more, which somehow made everything hurt more. I watched her disappear inside again. No dramatic confrontation. No shouting. No answers. Just another locked door between me and the truth. The opportunity arrived 2 days later. Not because I went looking for it, because Vanessa came looking for me. I was meeting our wedding planner when Melissa approached cautiously. Emily? Yeah? There's someone asking for you. I turned. A woman stood near the entrance. I recognized her immediately. She looked even more exhausted up close than she had from inside my car. She offered a nervous smile. Hi. I didn't answer. I know this is unexpected. You think? Vanessa let out a frustrated laugh. I knew this was a bad idea. She stood as though she were about to leave. She turned toward the door and actually took 2 steps. Then she stopped. Her shoulders sagged. After a long breath, she walked back to the chair and sat down again. No, she whispered. You deserve the truth. She looked genuinely uncomfortable. I was hoping we could talk. About what? Nathan. Every instinct told me to walk away. Instead, I followed her into the cafe next door. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup before speaking. I don't want you to misunderstand things. I folded my arms. Then help me understand. She took a slow breath. Nathan told me you're wonderful. That sentence alone made my stomach twist. Why were they discussing me? We dated years ago, she continued. It ended badly. I know he has an ex. She nodded. What you probably don't know is, after my mother got sick, I lost almost everything. I listened without interrupting. He helped me. Financially? Yes. Why? He said he couldn't live with himself if he abandoned someone he'd once loved. I searched her face for dishonesty. Instead, I found gratitude. Not guilt. He told me you knew. My heartbeat stopped. What? Vanessa frowned. He said you'd always supported him helping me. I forced my expression to remain calm. I see. He talks about you all the time. My throat tightened. He says you're kind. He says you understand. Every sentence felt like another piece of broken glass. Because either Nathan had lied to me, or he had lied to her. Possibly both. Vanessa reached into her purse. I actually wanted to give you something. She slid a small envelope across the table. Nathan left this here months ago. What is it? I assumed it belonged to you. I opened it. Inside was an old photograph. Nathan and Vanessa, standing on a beach. His handwriting covered the back. Some promises deserve a second chance. The date underneath froze the blood in my veins. It wasn't from years ago. It was written 8 months earlier. I slowly looked back up. Vanessa noticed my expression changing. For the first time since we'd met, she seemed confused. Emily? Doesn't he still tell you that? Vanessa stared at me, waiting for an answer. Emily? Her voice had softened. Doesn't he still tell you that? I looked down at the photograph again. Nathan's handwriting wasn't something that could be mistaken. I'd seen birthday cards, sticky notes on the refrigerator, the little messages he left inside my suitcase whenever I traveled for work. Every letter, every curve, every word belonged to him. No, I said quietly. He doesn't. Confusion slowly replaced the polite smile on Vanessa's face. He told me, she began, that the wedding had been postponed. I felt my chest tighten. Postponed? She lowered her eyes before giving the smallest nod. He said you two were having second thoughts and wanted more time. I couldn't even process the sentence. Our wedding was in 6 days. The invitations had been mailed months ago. Family members had already flown into town. Nothing had been postponed. He said you both agreed, Vanessa continued. He told me he wanted to finish helping me get back on my feet before starting married life. I took a slow breath. Nathan and I have never postponed anything. Neither of us spoke until someone in the cafe dropped a spoon. Vanessa looked as though the floor had disappeared beneath her. No. She whispered it more to herself than to me. No, that can't. I slid the photograph back across the table. When was the last time you saw him? She swallowed. 3 nights ago. Exactly the night Nathan had told me he was entertaining clients from Chicago. He had dinner with me. Everything inside me went numb. Not because I hadn't expected another lie. Because hearing someone else unknowingly confirm it made it impossible to hide behind hope anymore. Vanessa slowly reached for her phone. I need to show you something. She opened a conversation. Nathan's name appeared at the top. The messages weren't romantic. Not openly. But they carried an intimacy that shouldn't have existed. I'll stop by after my meeting. Don't forget your medication. You don't have to worry about rent this month. We'll figure everything out. The last message had been sent less than 24 hours earlier. I closed my eyes. 4 years together. Hundreds of conversations about honesty. Countless promises. Yet somehow, he'd managed to build an entirely separate routine without me ever noticing. Vanessa looked devastated. I thought he was just being kind. I think he wanted both of us to believe different stories. She nodded slowly. I don't want to ruin your wedding. I almost laughed. You didn't. That evening, I sat alone in my car outside our apartment building. Nathan's lights were already on. He was probably making dinner, probably wondering why I was late. For the first time in 4 years, I stood outside my own apartment wondering whether I truly knew the man waiting behind that door. When I finally walked inside, he smiled immediately. There you are. He crossed the room and kissed my cheek. I was about to call. Traffic. He frowned sympathetically. Long day? The longest. He reached for 2 wine glasses. I made your favorite pasta. Normally, I would have hugged him. Instead, I watched him move around the kitchen. Everything looked so familiar. He hummed while stirring the sauce. Asked whether my florist had confirmed the final arrangements. Complained about his father's refusal to learn the rehearsal dance. He played the role of devoted fiancé flawlessly. I wondered how long he'd been rehearsing. Halfway through dinner, he looked up. You're awfully quiet. I'm just tired. You've been tired a lot lately. I guess wedding planning finally caught up with me. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. 1 more week? His smile was warm. Then he added, after that, it'll just be us. The words almost broke me, because somewhere across town, he'd probably said something just as reassuring to Vanessa. That night, after Nathan fell asleep, I couldn't. I walked onto the balcony wrapped in a blanket and called Rachel. I met her. You met Vanessa? She doesn't know. Rachel was silent for a moment. What do you mean? She thinks the wedding isn't happening. Oh, what? She believes Nathan has been honest with both of us. Rachel sighed quietly. That's worse. I know. So what are you thinking? I stared at the city lights below. I keep asking myself the same question. Which is? If I confront him now, will I ever know the whole truth? The next morning, Nathan left early again. As soon as the front door closed, my phone rang. It was his mother. Emily, sweetheart. Hi, Linda. I just wanted to check in. Her cheerful voice made me smile despite everything. She had treated me like family since the second year Nathan and I dated. Are you excited? I am. You know Richard's pretending not to be emotional. I laughed softly. I can imagine. He spent an hour yesterday practicing his rehearsal speech. Really? He says he won't cry. He absolutely will. Linda laughed. Don't tell him I said that. When the call ended, I sat staring at the screen. His parents had no idea. Neither did mine. Dozens of people were preparing to celebrate a marriage that suddenly felt built on quicksand. That afternoon, Rachel called again. I found something else. What? The apartment lease. What about it? It expires next month. So? There was already paperwork submitted to renew it. I felt my stomach sink. Who signed it? Nathan. My fingers tightened around the phone. He committed to another 12 months? Yes. I looked across the living room. Our wedding invitations still sat in decorative boxes, waiting to be mailed to a few overseas relatives. The honeymoon itinerary lay folded beside them. Our future had been planned down to the smallest detail. I couldn't carry the weight alone anymore. That evening, I called Richard. Nathan's father answered after the second ring. Emily? Do you have time to meet tomorrow? His voice immediately changed. Is everything all right? No. A long pause followed. Does Nathan know you're calling me? No. When? Tomorrow morning. I'll be there. Richard arrived exactly at 9. He walked into my apartment wearing his usual calm expression. The retired Marine had always been a man of few words. He looked around. Where's Nathan? At work. Good. I set a thick folder on the coffee table before sliding every document out in front of him. Photographs, financial records, apartment paperwork, and copies of the messages Vanessa had allowed Rachel to verify. Richard didn't interrupt. He simply started reading. His face never changed, until he reached the final page. His jaw tightened. He removed his glasses. Read it again, then quietly asked, "Is all of this real?" I wish it wasn't. He sat in complete silence for nearly a minute. Finally, he stood and walked toward the window. When he turned back, he looked 10 years older. My son is going to destroy 3 families. I felt tears gathering again. I don't know what to do. Richard didn't answer immediately. He stared out the window for several seconds before speaking. No. His voice was so calm it unsettled me. You don't confront him. What? You don't confront him. I blinked. If you accuse him today, he'll deny everything. He already has. He'll erase evidence. He'll convince people you're jealous. So what do we do? Richard folded every document neatly back into the folder. We let him believe he's still in control. My heartbeat quickened. The rehearsal dinner. He met my eyes. That's where the truth comes out. Outside the window, wedding guests were already beginning to arrive in town. Inside the apartment, the countdown had changed. It was no longer 6 days until a wedding. It was 3 days until Nathan's entire life fell apart. The room filled with soft laughter as the slideshow began. A photograph of Nathan at 5 years old flashed across the screen, grinning through missing front teeth while holding a fishing pole nearly as tall as he was. Another showed him in a Little League uniform. Then middle school, his high school graduation, his first day of college. Richard narrated each photo with the kind of quiet pride only a father could carry. I remember this one, he said, pointing to an image of Nathan covered in birthday cake. He insisted he was old enough to cut it himself. The guests laughed. Nathan relaxed in his chair. He even glanced at me and whispered, "See? I told you he'd embarrass me." I smiled politely. Inside, my heartbeat pounded so hard I wondered if anyone else could hear it. Richard clicked to the next slide. Nathan receiving his college diploma. Another click. Our first Christmas together. Another. Our engagement on the lakeside dock where he'd proposed. People sighed happily. Emily's father leaned over and squeezed my mother's hand. "This is beautiful." Richard nodded. "It is." His thumb hovered over the remote for just a second longer. Then he pressed it again. The screen went black. The room fell silent. Nathan frowned. "Dad!" A video appeared. Not a home movie. Security footage. A parking garage. The timestamp read 9 days earlier. Nathan's SUV slowly pulled into frame. He stepped out. A few seconds later, Vanessa appeared. Without hesitation, she smiled and wrapped her arms around him. The room became perfectly still. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Nathan stared at the screen. Color drained from his face. "What?" His voice barely came out. What is this?" Richard didn't answer. The footage continued. Nathan unlocked the apartment entrance with his own key. Both disappeared inside together. The recording ended. Gasps echoed around the room. Someone dropped a fork. Across the table, Nathan's mother looked from the screen to her son. "Nathan?" He stood so quickly his chair scraped loudly across the floor. "Dad, turn it off." Nobody moved. "Please." His voice cracked. "This isn't..." He looked around the room as if someone else might rescue him. "As you're all getting the wrong idea." Richard's voice remained calm. "Sit down." "Dad." "Sit." For the first time since I'd known their family, Nathan actually obeyed without another word. Richard clicked again. Bank statements appeared on the screen, each transfer highlighted in red. Property management services. Month after month. Nearly a year of payments. Richard read each amount aloud. $2,350. Another click. $2,350. Again. $2,350. The repetition somehow made it even worse. Emily's father slowly turned toward Nathan. "You've been paying for another apartment?" Nathan opened his mouth. "It's not." Richard interrupted. "The lease renewal." Another document filled the screen. Nathan Brooks. Electronic signature. 12 more months. Signed 2 weeks earlier. Linda covered her mouth. "You renewed it?" Nathan looked around desperately. "I can explain." "I sincerely hope you can," Richard replied. Nathan suddenly turned toward me. "Emily." His voice cracked. "You knew?" I didn't answer. "You knew all this time?" I finally stood. I started asking questions after the wedding planner mentioned Vanessa. His eyes widened. "The apartment..." "I hired someone to verify the financial records." "You investigated me?" "No." I looked directly into his eyes. "I investigated the lies." Olivia, one of Nathan's closest friends, stood up. "There has to be some misunderstanding." Nathan immediately nodded. "Exactly. It's not what everyone thinks." Richard looked toward the entrance. Actually, Rachel had called Vanessa only the night before. Later, Vanessa admitted she'd almost turned the car around twice on the drive over. She wasn't coming to expose Nathan. She was coming because she'd finally realized another woman deserved the truth she'd never been given. The doors opened. Every head turned. Vanessa walked inside. She hesitated as nearly 50 strangers stared at her. She hadn't dressed for a confrontation. Simple navy dress. Minimal makeup. She looked terrified. I almost didn't come, she admitted quietly. Nathan's expression changed from panic to disbelief. Vanessa? She looked at him. You told me the wedding wasn't happening. The room exploded with whispers. What? What did she say? Linda slowly lowered herself back into her chair as if her legs could no longer support her. Nathan shook his head. Please. Vanessa continued. You told me you and Emily had postponed everything. She reached into her purse and removed several folded pages. I brought these because Rachel said everyone deserved the truth. Nathan lunged forward. Don't! Richard stepped between them. You're done deciding who speaks. Vanessa unfolded the documents. They're copies of the emails Nathan sent me. Richard handed them to several family members. One by one, people read silently. Emily's mother closed her eyes. Nathan's uncle muttered a curse under his breath. Nathan buried his face in his hands. I never asked him to leave you, Vanessa said, looking at me instead of Nathan. I believed he was helping me because he felt guilty about how our relationship ended. She swallowed hard. I didn't know he was lying to you. And I didn't know he was lying to you, I answered quietly. For the first time that evening, I realized we weren't enemies. We had simply been living inside two different versions of Nathan's life. Nathan finally stood again. I made mistakes. Richard looked at him. Mistakes? I was trying to help someone. By pretending you weren't getting married? I didn't know how to end it? Linda's voice trembled. End what? Nathan couldn't answer. His silence was louder than any confession. Richard removed the engagement ring box from his jacket pocket. He placed it gently on the table between us. Then he looked at me. Emily. I met his eyes. You deserve to decide what happens next. The room waited. I slowly slipped the engagement ring off my finger. For months, I'd imagined this ring staying on my hand for the rest of my life. Instead, I laid it inside the box. Nathan stared at it as though he couldn't believe what he'd just seen. No. He stepped toward me. Emily, please. I took one step backward. I spent 4 years believing honesty was the foundation of our relationship. My voice remained surprisingly steady. It turns out I was the only one building on it. Please. I don't even know which version of you was real. The one standing here. I shook my head. No. The real Nathan is the man who thought two women would never compare notes. Silence. Complete silence. Richard closed the ring box. Richard looked around the room before speaking. There will be no wedding tomorrow. No one argued. No one even looked surprised anymore. The decision had already been made the moment the truth reached this room. Not even Nathan. The venue has already been contacted. The caterer has been notified. The remaining vendors will receive cancellation calls tonight. Linda quietly began crying. Nathan looked around the room, searching desperately for someone to defend him. No one did. Not Olivia. Not his cousins. Not his friends. For the first time in years, he stood completely alone. I picked up my purse. As I reached the doorway, Nathan called my name one last time. Emily. I paused without turning around. When did you stop loving me? I closed my eyes. I didn't. A tear finally rolled down my cheek. I stopped believing you. Then I walked out into the cool night air. Behind me, I could still hear raised voices inside the restaurant. But for the first time in weeks, the noise no longer belonged to my future. The garment bag still hung untouched in the corner of my parents' guest room. Through the clear plastic cover, I could see the wedding dress I'd imagined wearing only 24 hours earlier. A week earlier, I had imagined slipping into it while my bridesmaids laughed around me. Now it looked less like a dress, and more like evidence from a life that no longer existed. My phone vibrated. 38 unread messages. Most were from relatives asking if the rumors were true. Several came from friends checking on me. 12 were from Nathan. I opened the first one. Emily, please let me explain. The second, nothing happened the way it looked. The third, I'm outside. Please talk to me. The last message simply read, I can't lose you. I didn't reply. I stared at the message for almost a minute before locking my phone. Whatever explanation Nathan had prepared, it belonged to a version of us that no longer existed. By noon, Richard called. How are you holding up? I've been better. I figured. His voice sounded exhausted. Older. I wanted you to hear this from me before anyone else. What happened? Nathan packed a bag this morning. I stayed quiet. He moved into a hotel. And Vanessa? Richard sighed. She refused to see him. That surprised me. I thought she'd take him back. So did he. Richard paused before continuing. Apparently, she told him she spent nearly a year believing he was trying to become a better man. And now? She said she finally realized he was only becoming a better liar. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, Richard said quietly, I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize. Yes, I do. He isn't your responsibility. He'll always be my son. His voice cracked. But you were becoming my daughter. That hurt more than I expected. 3 days later, the wedding venue refunded nearly everything that could legally be refunded. Flowers, entertainment, transportation. Most vendors understood once they learned the ceremony had been canceled. I asked the planner to donate the untouched floral arrangements to a nearby senior care center. They'll brighten someone's day, Melissa said. I smiled. They deserve them more than I do. Nathan didn't disappear. If anything, he tried harder. He sent handwritten letters, left flowers outside my apartment, asked mutual friends to arrange just one conversation. I declined every request, not because I hated him, because every conversation we'd had during the previous year now felt contaminated. Even the happy memories carried questions. Which promises had been real? Which smiles had been rehearsed? I no longer knew. 2 weeks after the canceled wedding, Vanessa called. I hope this isn't inappropriate. It isn't. She hesitated. I wanted to apologize. You don't owe me one. I still feel responsible. You were lied to, too. She let out a long breath. I ended all contact with Nathan. I'm glad. I wasn't competing with you. I know. He made us believe completely different stories. We talked for almost an hour, not about Nathan, about rebuilding trust, about embarrassment, about how strange it felt to mourn someone who was still alive. When we hung up, I realized something important. Closure rarely comes from the person who caused the damage. Sometimes it comes from someone who survived the same storm. Nathan's professional life unraveled faster than either of us expected. His company launched an internal review after learning he'd used corporate relationships to justify personal financial decisions. He wasn't fired, but the promotion he'd been expecting quietly disappeared. Several major clients were reassigned. His manager reportedly told him, "We're struggling to trust your judgment." Ironically, those were the exact words I'd wanted to say weeks earlier. About a month after the wedding that never happened, Richard invited me to dinner. I wasn't sure you'd come. I almost didn't. Linda hugged me before I even sat down. There were no awkward questions, no attempts to defend Nathan, just homemade food, familiar laughter, and a sadness that belonged to all of us. After dinner, Richard disappeared upstairs. He returned carrying a small wooden box. The ring. I looked at it without touching it. I can't take that. You bought it together. No. He gently pushed the box toward me. My son broke the promise attached to it. You didn't. I slowly accepted it. Richard smiled sadly. Sell it. What? Buy yourself something that reminds you life keeps moving. I laughed softly. You sound like a therapist. No. A faint smile crossed his face, but it disappeared almost as quickly as it had come. I'm just an old father trying to make one decent decision after watching his son make too many terrible ones. Autumn arrived quietly. I started hiking again. Something I'd stopped doing during wedding planning because every weekend had become another meeting, another appointment, another checklist. The first familiar face I recognized was Daniel. Months earlier, we'd bumped into each other outside my wedding venue. Back then, we'd joked about getting back to hiking once life settled down. Neither of us could have imagined how differently that promise would come true. Looks like you finally made it back. I guess I did. This time I meant it. He wasn't loud or effortlessly charming the way Nathan had always been. Daniel listened far more than he talked, and somehow that quiet confidence felt more comforting than any grand romantic gesture ever had. When I stumbled crossing a small stream, he reached out instinctively. You okay? I will be. The corners of his mouth lifted, but his eyes stayed fixed on me as if he were waiting for my reaction. Good answer. That was all. No flirting. No dramatic moment. Just kindness. Real kindness. The kind that doesn't ask for applause. A month later, I finally sold the engagement ring. I expected to feel guilty. Instead, I felt lighter. I used part of the money to book the solo trip I'd canceled after the wedding. The rest I donated to a nonprofit that helped people rebuild their lives after financial abuse and relationship fraud. It felt like closing a chapter exactly where it belonged. Just before Christmas, a letter arrived. The handwriting was unmistakable. Nathan. I almost threw it away. Instead, I opened it. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't another excuse. It was only one page. He admitted he'd spent so long trying to avoid disappointing everyone that he'd become someone who disappointed everyone anyway. He wrote that therapy had forced him to confront choices he'd spent years justifying. He didn't ask for another chance. He simply ended with, I hope one day the memory of me stops hurting. I folded the letter, placed it back inside the envelope, then tucked it into a drawer. Some apologies don't erase the past. They simply acknowledge it. On New Year's Eve, I stood on a lakeside dock watching fireworks bloom across the water. Daniel stood beside me, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate. You've been smiling more lately. I've noticed. What changed? I watched the reflections shimmer across the lake. I stopped grieving the future I imagined. And I started appreciating the future I still have. He handed me one of the cups. That sounds like a pretty good trade. I smiled. It is. As midnight arrived, my phone buzzed one final time. A holiday message from Richard and Linda. Wherever life takes you next, you'll always have a place at our table. I looked at the screen for a long moment before typing back. Thank you for treating me like family, even when life didn't go according to plan. I slipped the phone into my pocket and looked up at the night sky. I stood there until the last firework disappeared into the darkness. The cold air stung my face, but for the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about the wedding that never happened. I was thinking about the life that finally belonged to me. And somehow, that was enough.